Grace, mercy, and peace to you from God the Father and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. We continue with our series, Eyes on Jesus. Tonight we consider betraying eyes. Those eyes that looked upon Jesus on the evening in which he was delivered up into the hands of those who would arrest him, persecute him, crucify him. The gospel in Mark is interesting in as much as Jesus declares his full knowledge of everything that's going to happen in advance. He knows where they're going to have Passover. And so he says to the disciples, hey, go into town, you're going to meet a guy, and he's going to show you the place. It's kind of unclear whether that guy actually knew he was the guy or not, but the disciples show up and, hey, where's a place for the master? And lo and behold, they show him a room all prepared. One of the commentaries I read suggests that this was a place that maybe they had met before, that the fellows who were sent in advance probably knew where this was going to be, and so it was easy to prepare. But still, Jesus knew in advance what was going to be happening, and so as they were sitting and having dinner, it was kind of a surprise that he is suggesting, as he's breaking bread and as he's passing it around the room, that he suggests someone will betray him. Now, until this point, there's really been no sign or no indication from Jesus, except maybe small mentions that he's going to have to suffer and die. We don't catch it in this verse, but in previous verses that we would have read if we were picking it up from the very beginning of 14, the disciples would have said, hey, we can't go back to Jerusalem. Prior to him arriving, they said, they want to kill you there. It's probably not a good idea for us to go there. And he said, no, we've got to go. So he knows that there's some rough times laying ahead, but now he's starting to uncover it, and he says, one of you 12 will betray me. Interesting that he doesn't say that it's Judas, right? He simply says it's one of you 12, causing all 12 of them to look at each other and think like, hey, is it you? Is it you? Is it me? And they all ask him one at a time, Lord, is it I? And they're wondering. And so you wonder, what was Judas thinking at that moment? Right? They're all looking at each other with kind of suspicious eyes. They're looking at each other saying, somebody's going to betray you. They're looking at Jesus with curiosity in their eyes and saying, you're going to get betrayed? You're going to be arrested and die? Like what? None of this makes sense to them, but they're looking to see who's guilty. And I wonder, was Jesus, sitting there watching them for their responses? But through his eyes, he knew what was to happen. Now, Mark doesn't share it in his account of the Passover meal, but John does, in which John says, Jesus speaking, the one who dips in the bowl when I dip in the bowl is the one who is to betray me. And then in John's account, he looks at Judas, still unnamed in even John's account, and says, what you must do, go do quickly. So in John's account, there's an acknowledgement of who this person is. And in John's account, well, Judas gets up and leaves, but the disciples are unsure, like why he's leaving. In their mind, well, he's the carrier of the pocketbook, so they think, well, maybe he's going to buy more bread, some fish. Maybe he's going to go, it's a Passover, so it's customary to give donations to the poor on that particular holiday in Judaism, so maybe he was going to give out alms to the poor. It wasn't clear to anybody around the table what was going on, but you got to wonder, behind each of the disciples' eyes, if they were looking at each other thinking, is it you? Is it you? Is it you? And then what was Judas doing? Was he looking down? Like, uh-oh, they're on me. Or was he like looking at, defiantly? It's not me. It's you. Not me. Can't be me. Judas' eyes was the plot. He systematically designed this plot to betray Jesus. Now there's all kinds of discussion and commentary and theology about why this occurred, and maybe there was a reasoning. He was trying to motivate an insurrection, and so he thought that maybe if Jesus could just get arrested, then everybody would rise up and get the Romans out of town, and it would be a great fight, which was what they wanted from their Messiah. I mean, that's entirely possible. But it's more likely that this is God's plan. It's God's plan that because of our own sinfulness, from the beginning of time, that He has designed this moment for His Son to be betrayed and be put to death, that we might benefit from that death and resurrection. To God, it's not a betrayal. It's part of the plan for our own salvation. So we look at Judas and we think, man, you got some nerve, buddy, betraying the Lord, you know. Through our eyes, we're looking at him saying, this guy's a scoundrel. You know, he did it for money. And so we go from the Passover in the upper room. Get that little passage in 32 says they've gone to Gethsemane now. So an hour or so later, they kind of leave the dinner table and they've gone out to the Garden of Gethsemane, just outside of Jerusalem. And it's a place where Jesus liked to go and pray. And again, we're getting kind of half of the story here. We'll get a little more of it later. But it says that he's returned 2 times prior now. And some of his disciples are sitting there, James, John, and Peter, and they're sleeping. Now, I can tell you, if you've ever been to a Passover meal, there's a couple of glasses of wine going around, and you're eating some chicken and some eggs, and you're doing all this stuff. So these guys are in digestion mode right now. It's late at night. It's probably not unusual that they're a little sleepy. But Jesus comes out and says, dudes, wake up, man. Come on. You can't even stay awake. My betrayer has come. He knows at this point. They don't. They're still unclear that it's Judas. He left the table. He left the room. They just know that they've been praying, and this is the moment where Jesus is now looking forward to and preparing for this cup that cannot be passed from him. He knows that he'll be betrayed. And he says, my betrayer has come. Judas arriving is with guards. They've got clubs. They've got torches. It's dark. Behind the eyes of these guards and these authorities, they can't see really well. And they're looking. Their eyes are looking for some evidence. Their eyes are saying, okay, what does this guy look like, Judas? How are we going to know? You all look the same, you Hebrews. You look at the long beards and the hoodies on. I mean, I can't tell one from the other. Judas says, I'll give you a sign. I'll give you a sign. And I'm going to go up to the one, and I'm going to kiss him. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever gone to Europe or anything like that. I haven't, but I watch the Tour de France every July, and so whenever somebody wins a stage of the Tour de France, it's completely a masculine thing. It's probably wrong, but they have 2 pretty women standing on either side handing them flowers, because they just won that stage of the tour. It's a 30-day bicycle race if you don't know this, and so each day there's an award for who wins that day, and then typically the Europeans, they just come over and they kiss on like both sides of the cheek. It's just like so you have these people kissing. So I imagine it was kind of like that. When I go see my dad, who's 84 years old, I'll kiss him, When my son leaves at night, he goes, Dad, I'm going out. He comes over, he puts his head down. I'm saying, you're supposed to kiss me. You're supposed to kiss me. I'm the father here. I'm going to kiss your forehead. But Judas says, I'm going to give you a sign. You're going to know he's going to be the guy I kiss. And so he walks up to him, and in reverent respect, which is almost like a slap in the face, literally. He says, Rabbi, Hebrew meaning teacher, honored one. And he greets him with this respectful title and then kisses him. Now again, in Mark's gospel, it doesn't say this line that I think some of us are so very familiar with, but in John's it does. When Jesus then responds to Judas, it says, Judas, do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? To which, of course, Judas has no response. He is guilty as charged. This is all part of the plan. And so on the sign of him acknowledging Jesus and kissing him, the guards fall upon him and arrest him. I see this as just a defining and painful moment. I don't know if anybody has seen the Mel Gibson rendition of Passion of the Christ. Heart-wrenching, brutal in some areas, and I think it's probably accurate historically to what Jesus would have gone through in terms of the difficulty and the brutality. I think that's not too far from the truth. But the reality is I can't imagine being there and not feeling like I'd want to kill Judas. Right? You got at least 3 of the disciples there that are caught between this quandary now of wanting to strike out against one of their own disciples, somebody who they've spent 3 years traveling with because they've just been betrayed, and now they too really are now outlaws, right? Jesus just got arrested, which means anybody associated with him is now an outlaw. So the challenge is, well, do we defend him? Do we stand up and try and fight back, or do we split? Because they're coming for us. Because they've been betrayed as much as Jesus. What we realize when we look more closely at this is that, yes, Jesus was betrayed by Judas. Yes, it was part of God's plan. In that moment when he was celebrating the Passover meal, while he was being handed over to the authorities, God was handing to us the sacrament. We were being introduced to the body and the blood. That opportunity where we can have the most close relationship with Jesus in the communion that we celebrate. And it's the reminder that that death gives us the benefit of life. I remember being really, really young, and I was in elementary school, and so we were leaving school one day, and at that time, I want to say the 10 Commandments were on TV. No, it couldn't have been the 10 Commandments. It was something like, it might have been like Jesus of Nazareth or something like that, but we're talking like 76, 77, somewhere around there. And as we're leaving, this kid Scott, who lived right next door to me, you know, we were friends and hated each other all at the same time, you know, like little kids do. And we're going. He says, you Jews, you killed Jesus. I said, I didn't kill nobody, man. Right? I said, there's that guy Puncher's Pilate, man. I don't know anything about that stuff, man. I don't know anything about Jesus. And I remember being so offended. I'm like, I didn't kill nobody, man. I'm the chosen people, man. We don't kill people. But then as I got older and I started studying and I grew closer to the Lord and actually became a Christian, I'm like, well, actually, you know, the lawmakers at the time, you know, look, they could have been, you know, Hindu, you know, they still would have been, whoever made the law at the time were the ones who were catching the blame. But now I see more clearly, as you should as well, that really the lawmakers, the rabbis, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the people who did the organizational religious structure of the day were a tool. Just as Judas was a tool, a way in which God could carry out his plan, that all of us might be saved. That it's our own sin that put Jesus on the cross. It's not the Romans, and it wasn't the Jews, and it wasn't even Judas. It was sin that put him on the cross. Our sin that put him on the cross. And God loved us so incredibly that was a viable option to send his own son to death that we individually might be saved. Incredibly, Jesus took that role on willingly. Yes, he prayed in the garden. As the disciples were sleeping, he was praying. He said, Lord, if there's any way we could do this another way, it would really be great if we could do this some other way. But your will be done, not mine. He willingly went down that path. And so we should look at Jesus not through the eyes of Judas the betrayer, but through our own eyes as betrayers, because our sin betrayed Jesus to the cross. And when we don't acknowledge that, when we forget and continually live lives that are in and out of God's will, we run the risk of continually putting him back on the cross. We need to look at him not so much through the eyes of a betrayer as we go forward, but through the eyes of the redeemed. We are the redeemed. We are the ones who are saved through his resurrection. And that's the point of this Lenten season. Yeah, it seems like we'll talk about it a lot, and there's a recurring theme. But we need that. We need to be reminded on a regular basis that our imperfection, left unto itself, would just be more imperfection. There's nothing that we could ever do to justify our being in the presence of God. Only Jesus could do that for us. It's easy to blame someone else. I like blaming Judas. It's great, you know. It's his fault. It really is. It's my fault. I'm raising my hand. It's my fault. Remarkably, the Lord looks at me and says, yeah, it is your fault, but I love you anyway. It is your fault. You're imperfect, but I still accept you. It is your fault. But if you were the only one around, David Santos, I would still send my son for you. And so as we go forward in the rest of this Lenten season, we continue to look at Jesus' life and his passion story. Just remember that our eyes will always be clouded with the visions that we try to hide behind. We try to hide behind this idea that if I could just be, good enough, or if I could just be right enough, if I could just be, doing the right thing all the time, that maybe the Lord would look at me with righteousness. He already does. He already does. Jesus did it already. It's done. And so you are righteous in God's eyes. That is how God sees you in his eyes. Amen.
Amen.
May the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Continue now.